So just let me know, okay? If you remember.
Yeah, when next time I'm in the office, I'll take a look.
Yeah, thank you.
And looks like YouTube is getting ready.
Buenas tardes, ¿cómo están?
We're on time. We've got a good group. We're doing well. Just give it a second for people to log in through YouTube, and then we can get down to work. We've got some very interesting topics tonight, I think, with both practical as well as theoretical importance.
I catch up with the previous two classes also.
I'm sorry, the microphone cut out with what?
I catch up with the previous two classes also.
Excellent, excellent.
And I had a question about that, but I forgot what was the question.
I can't answer a question.
That's a problem when you study when driving. So you
Yes.
cannot stop
Yes.
and start writing the question.
So usually what will happen is if I want to look something up, or if I have a question about something that I'm hearing while I'm driving, is I wait for one of the many red lights that we can find in Florida. And then I quickly send a note to myself.
Yeah.
But you know, at least we can study while driving, which that was something that I loved when I was in Japan. You know, I had a commute on the subway, and subway was perfect for just standing there and reading. It was, you know, ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're driving every day, it doesn't work to read while driving. But there are so many great things now on either audio or podcast that really you can make the drive very very productive.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Okay. So let us pick up with Mishnah Chullin. We're in chapter 3 and Mishnah number 5. Last week we were finishing off by talking about some of the damages to an animal that would render it treifa. Again, just reminding, we're using technical language here. This is not the use of the word treif that is used in the common conversation. This means an animal that is suffering from a wound that would lead to its death, but you have slaughtered it before the wound itself killed the animal. If the wound itself kills the animal before you can complete the slaughter, then that is nivela. But in this case, we're talking about treifa, where you did the slaughter, but the animal was suffering from some issue beforehand. In Mishnah 5, we're going to look at some other types of issues that the animal might be suffering from, some of which, if it's suffering from it, but you slaughter it, the animal is okay. And others, if you slaughter it, the animal is still treifa. Yes, Aaron.
Rabbi, it's treifa. Treifa gives impurities while nevela does not, right?
Vice versa, if I'm not mistaken.
Nevela gives impurity and treifa doesn't?
Yes.
All right. And Rabbi, this isn't the conservative translation, is it?
Oh, sorry. Yes, you're right. We have been using the other translation. Right. Give me just a second, and everyone can see now how to go find it.
That was the question, Rabbi.
Yes.
Thank you, Aaron. That was exactly the question. Between what give you impurity between nevela and trefa, because the trefa that they say that the trefa is the one that give you the impurity, and nevela not.
No, I think the nevela gives impurity. Okay, hold on. Now you're making me doubt myself, and I don't believe in going off just memory. Give me 2 seconds, and I can look back in the other Mishnah and find this out. Okay, I'm going to narrate that I'm looking and waiting for. Yes, nevela conveys ritual impurity, like I said, but treifa does not. So if you come across the dead body of an animal, then that body will create impurity. if you kill the animal with slaughter, but the animal is considered treifa, then it does not create impurity. In both cases, you're not allowed to eat the animal, but for purity reasons, that can make a difference sometimes. Nevela creates impurity, treifa does not.
And if you kill the animal and slaughter the animal and you discover that cause a sickness, they come to be treifa and you don't have any impurity, correct?
No impurity, but not always treifa, right? So that's actually what we're going to see here in Mishnah 5. We're going to see some issues where the animal you might think would be treifa, meaning suffering from a terminal issue, but it's considered to be okay. All right, so here we are. Yes.
One last question. I always get confused. Nevelah is the one where the body's just dead, and treifa is the one that's slaughtered improper?
Correct. No. Treifa was slaughtered properly, but it was not properly alive when you did it, meaning that it was suffering from something that was considered to be terminal-ish.
All right. And Nevelah was the one that was slaughtered improperly?
No.
Dead body.
Yes, actually, yes. Nevelah is if you slaughter it improperly. But Nevelah is also if it just drops dead from a heart attack, or if it gets hit by lightning, or hit by a bus, or hit by a lion.
Or just old age.
Or just old age, exactly. If it dies from anything other than a kosher slaughter, it is definitely Nevelah. Which means an improper slaughter as well would also make it Nevelah. If it has been slaughtered, then it could be kosher. But if the animal was suffering from one of these issues that we've looked at, then even though it was slaughtered correctly, it is now considered treifa.
But the improper slaughter makes nevelah.
Improper slaughter makes nevelah. It's just a corpse when you kill it with a wrong slaughter. If I take a hammer and hit the cow in the head, all I've done is made nevelah. There's nothing I can do with the meat. I can't eat it at all.
I don't have an issue with that because it's true that you did it incorrectly, but to make nevelah meaning to make this impurity to you.
Correct.
When was a mistake. So I was thinking maybe to make this treifa because okay, you cannot eat, but still it's not that you make this impure, transmitting impurity for a mistake.
Right, but I mean, a mistake is still doing it improperly, which means the animal did objectively not die from a kosher slaughter. And if it died from something other than kosher slaughter, it is nevelah. I mean, it's very binary. I mean, even if by accident, it's still not permitted. You know, just like if I accidentally throw cheese on my hamburger while it's cooking on the grill, it's an accident, but I still can't eat it. Right? Accident means that you're not liable for the sin of deliberately trying to break a mitzvah, but it doesn't mean that you are free from the consequences of the accident. All right, so let's get back into treifa land. And we're going to start off with things that are not treifa. They look like they should be, but they are not. If an animal suffers from congestion of the blood, or was overcome by smoke, or by a cold, or if it ate oleander, which is a type of plant that is poisonous, or chicken dung, which was also believed to be very bad for animals, or if it drank noxious or bad water, then it is permitted. All of those things are dangerous to animals. All of them are indeed even perhaps likely to cause them to die. But if the animal was slaughtered correctly before it died and gave all of the signs that we talked about before, meaning, with the leg kicking and all of that, then it is considered to still be kosher, as long as the slaughter was done correctly. Everybody okay with that? All right.
You can eat it.
It is okay. It is permitted. You can eat it. On the other hand, if it ate poison or was bitten by a snake, it is not forbidden as treifa, but it is forbidden as a danger to life. All right, so this is a category we haven't talked about, but one that is interesting to note because it does have a lot of other implications in the modern world. So let's deal with the old version first, the classic case. I have a sheep. The sheep is bitten by a snake. The sheep's not dead, and the sheep is not necessarily even dying yet, and I slaughter it. I can't eat the sheep. I can't eat the lamb. Now, why not? It's not treifa, but it is now dangerous to me because the snake's poison is inside of it. And that introduces this new idea of something being dangerous because it is, or something that is being forbidden because it is a sakana, because it is a danger. And indeed, this idea is something that has been used in modern times as well to try and talk about things, for example, like smoking, or using of non or illegitimate drugs, cocaine, heroin, that kind of thing, because they're not technically forbidden as being not kosher, but they are a danger to life. And as such, many authorities have used this line of reasoning to say that there are many substances that we might eat or ingest voluntarily into our body that are dangerous to us, and therefore they should be forbidden, not because they're not kosher, because they're technically not kosher, they're technically not forbidden because of kashrut, but they should be forbidden because of the danger they present. And I see, Aaron, I think your hand was up first.
Oh, yeah. That thing you said, sakana, danger, that's the same as patua nefesh, right?
Pikuach nefesh is when you will have a reason to save a life, usually because of sakana, because of danger, right? So sakana creates the situation where pikuach nefesh becomes important, meaning translated, danger creates a situation where the saving of a life becomes more important than other mitzvot. But yeah, sakana is a good halachic word to learn because it comes up in many different situations. It literally just means danger, but it usually means maybe you might use the American Supreme Court term, a clear and present danger. That this is something that is obviously creating the potential for meaningful harm. That's why, you're allowed to go out to the beach, even though there's a chance you might get skin cancer at some point in the future. It's not forbidden. But many people argue smoking, even though, it's not a guarantee that you're going to get lung cancer because of the connection being so much closer and so many other issues with smoking, not only lung cancer. There are many who use this line of reasoning to say smoking of all types should be forbidden. Natan, you're muted. There you go.
Yeah. And about the line of eat a poison or it was bitten by a snake, that is unfit. But what about the ratio 160? Because maybe the poison is so little in quantity that cannot affect in the blood of the whole cow. So we cannot count the ratio of 160 in this case?
No. So the batal b'shishim, the idea that something can be nullified because it is of an insignificant amount, a 1/60th amount, it doesn't usually apply for a situation where we're talking about life and death. That the animal ate something that was poisonous to us, which I should have pointed out is an important distinction, right? The oleander was poisonous to the sheep, but it wasn't poisonous to us. It's okay to eat the sheep. The sheep eats arsenic, that's deadly to us, therefore we can't eat the lamb. So we don't look for ways to nullify that by the quantity, because sometimes, most of the time, even a very, very small quantity of poison can still be very, very dangerous for a person. And I think most of us probably would feel comfortable with that as being the rule. If I told you that I put 1/60th of the size of my hamburger with arsenic into the hamburger, just 1/60th, and then I gave you the hamburger, would you eat it? No. You'd say, no. If you can guarantee that there's poison in that hamburger, even if it's a small amount, then no. I don't want that. I think I'm going to go somewhere else for my lunch. Okay. So again, this is important, and I should point out that this can get used even more distantly from the idea of what we're eating. Some people will use this line of argument against extreme sports, whether or not skydiving or surfing in very dangerous situations or other types of activities that have a very high risk factor, free rock climbing up a mountainside. People will say as well that with this, along with other ideas, that we don't have permission to needlessly risk our life in a dangerous way because of this concept. If it's a danger to life that is very apparent, then we should not be permitted to do it. It's not a universal opinion. There is still a lot of argument about what counts as the threshold of danger, but you should know that that is part of the discussion. All right, 3.6. All right, we're going to get into a very interesting topic here, one that I hope will have some interesting applications for the modern world as well. And that is, how do you know the animal species is kosher? And we're going to look at a few different types of species. We have to look at land animals. We're going to have to look at birds. We're going to have to look at bugs, and we're going to have to look at fish. And we're going to start off with land animals. Land animals are easy. The characteristics of cattle and of wild animals, meaning like deer and things, are stated in the Torah, Leviticus 11, which Rabbi Kolp gives us as our quick summary: split hooves and chewing cuds, right? Done. If it doesn't have a split hoof and it also, or it doesn't chew its cud, because it has to have both, then it's not kosher. So a squirrel doesn't have split hooves, doesn't chew its cud, not kosher. A pig has split hooves, doesn't chew its cud, not kosher. A deer chews its cud, has split hooves, is kosher. Very, very simple. There is virtually no confusion at all about what species of animals are kosher, at least not that I've ever heard. You can argue about where to slaughter it and how to slaughter it and things like that. But as far as whether the species is kosher, land animals are really, really simple. The characteristics of birds are not stated, meaning when you look in the Torah, that doesn't give us any symbols, any signs, a siman of what to follow to know if a bird is kosher or not. Instead, there is a list of forbidden birds. So the sages are going to add some interpretation to what that list tells us about kosher and non-kosher birds. And as you're going to see, this is going to get a little contentious. So let me just finish the description, and then we'll ask or we'll talk some questions. So the sages said, every bird that seizes its prey is unclean. So because that list is not 100% clear, because part of it seems to be specific and other parts of it seems to be species-based, the rabbis wanted to give us some more guidelines than just the list of names. And one of the guidelines they're giving here at the beginning is that if it seizes its prey, meaning that it attacks it with its feet to grab it, and this gets a little bit of debate, but basically imagine, a hawk coming down, grabbing a rabbit with its talons, then any bird that eats like that is not kosher. Right? What we would call raptors in the modern language are not kosher by this definition. That because it is eating like that, that means it is not. Now, What this means is that all birds of prey, meaning birds that attack other birds or mammals, are not kosher birds. Not kosher at all. Even if we can't find them on the list, they're not kosher. On the other hand, what's that?
Roosters attack each other.
What does?
Rooster.
Oh, the rooster. Rooster. Yeah, roosters attack, but roosters don't eat the other bird. When the rooster attacks other birds, it runs up and it tries to gouge them with the spur, the spike on the back of their foot, or with their bill, or not their bill, their beak. But the rooster doesn't then eat the other rooster. They fight, but they don't eat each other. They're not carnivorous, and they're definitely not cannibals. Chickens have a lot of other problems, but not that. On the other hand, and I just want to finish this off so we get the full list, every bird that has an extra toe or a crop and a gizzard that can be peeled is clean. Now, I'm going to give Rabbi Kulp's explanation because he probably does a better job in doing this shortly than I can. All right, so if the bird doesn't seize the prey, it's not a raptor, then we look for these other signs. And as he points out, this would be necessary in cases new birds are discovered and one does not know whether they can be eaten. So if the bird has an extra toe on the back of its foot, meaning, and I can't really do this with one hand, so imagine you've got the bird feet out in the front, and then at the back, hold on, can I do a picture? There's another claw sticking out the back of the foot. If it's got that, then we're in good shape, right? It has to have that back toe. If it's crop, which we talked about was that extra part of the digestion where the food goes in on the way down, if it has that crop or the gizzard, which is the part which also uses it to grind up the food, if you can peel that open by hand, meaning it's of a softer, easily separatable material, then that is clean. Now, as he points out, many commentators debate whether it needs to have one or whether it needs to have all of these signs. So we're not going to get into all of the detail of that. And I just want to get Rabbi Elazar Ben Tzadok's opinion before we do the whole discussion. He says every bird that parts its toes is unclean, right? Which, as he points out, it means if it stood on a rope, it splits its toes, 2 in the front and 2 in the back, then that is unclean. And this would be considered another sign of a predator, of a bird of prey. All right, so let's get the questions out, and then we'll see if we can't make some sense about what this means in the modern world. Aaron, question.
Yes, Rabbi. Is there a reason why they, it looks like they do deductive reasoning for the animals and then inductive reasoning for the birds? Is there a reason they did that?
Yeah, because the Torah gives us a set of simanim, of signs, of symbols, of actual physical characteristics for mammals. It does not give us that for birds. Therefore, the rabbis are left having to induce. Technically, it is inductive reasoning, as you say, rather than deductive, even though that's not how we say it in normal common English. But for logical language, yes, they have to use inductive reasoning. And they looked at the list and they said, what do all the birds that are forbidden have in common, or at least the vast majority? They are birds of prey. What do birds of prey have in common? Well, they have in common the way they eat, and they have in common certain physical characteristics involving their feet and involving their digestive system. So they use that list as the template to try and create the list of things that would be a sign of a bird that was prohibited. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and is there a reason why you can eat birds that are not predators, but you can't eat the birds that are predators? Because it's kind of weird if they don't eat other birds, you can eat them, but the ones that are predators you can't eat.
Well, like I said, partly that is because the list of forbidden birds in the Torah strongly leans in that direction. The vast majority of them are either obviously rather unusual birds, like an ostrich, or are birds of prey of one variety or another. the vast majority of them. So the Torah definitely seems to be saying, don't eat birds of prey. And the rabbis were trying to work out, how do I know it's a bird of prey or not? Because they needed some taxonomy to figure this out, the anatomy to help figure that out, rather than just a list. Because we might come across other birds. For example, my favorite topic, the turkey, right? The turkey. Why do we get to eat the turkey? The turkey was not around in the time of Moses, meaning he wasn't around in that area of the world. And yet, when we finally discovered the turkey, we gobbled it up. Thank you for the joke. We gobbled it up because, first of all, people believed it had already been established as being permitted. There's a whole long discussion about the miscommunication of its pedigree. But even if it hadn't been, there are plenty of communities that would have looked at these signs and said the turkey is okay. The turkey does meet the criteria of a clean bird based off these anatomical signs.
Right. And is the reason that it's all right to eat birds that eat insects and worms and not just vegetation is because those weren't considered meaningful forms of life, therefore they're still not predatory?
Well, they are meaningful. As we'll see, that we see that birds that eat fish can sometimes be okay. Very small fish, like a duck, can sometimes eat things like that. And insects, there are rules about what we eat for fish and bugs, but they are much more lenient. But then we move into the realm of interpretation and what I would call musar, of trying to delve into the underlying ethos of what God is trying to teach us. Clearly, God is not opposed to predation. After all, there's nothing wrong with the lion. There's nothing wrong with the eagle. God is not telling us that they are bad. And both lion and eagle are used as metaphors in ways that are very positive. Additionally, human beings are predators, and that is allowed as well. We are allowed to eat cows and sheep and all sorts of other things. And that shows that the Torah is not opposed to us eating other animals. So it would be odd for the Torah to be opposed to birds eating other animals. Plus, it is possible, although less common, for animals such as cows, sheep, and deer to eat meat, to eat other animals. It's not common, but they will do it on occasion. So they are not strict vegetarians either. Really, we can talk about the musar implications that in general, the Torah seems to be saying that we should not behave like animals that rip and tear at our food or rip and tear at the world according to our desire. That kashrut, as a general rule, is trying to limit our passionate dismemberment of the world for our own consumption and appetite. But that is a layer of interpretation. It's not explicit within the text. And so we have to acknowledge that is interpretive rather than definitive.
All right. So the last question, sorry. So this rule seems like it's more not as a statutory rule than anything else then, right?
Well, indeed. So this rule about having the extra toe and having the crop and the gizzard that you can peel, or the idea that if it's a bird of, if you can see that it's a bird of prey, that we don't eat it. This rule was considered to be ambiguous enough, these signs that the rabbis had given, that especially in the Ashkenazic world, the European world of Jewry, although this was officially accepted, nobody would actually eat a new bird that didn't already have a established pattern as having been acceptable on the table. So if you brought a new bird to the community and said, hey, look, this bird has the extra toe, it's got the peelable crop or gizzard, so let's have it for lunch, most of the authorities in Europe, especially as we went further and further along, would say no, thank you. That even though it might be kosher, because there is not an established tradition of eating that particular species of bird, they do not want to risk eating a species that might actually be not kosher. So that actually did create a problem, like I said, around the turkey. But thankfully, we got past that by people not realizing it was a problem. And by the time they realized, there was already an established tradition. And so it kind of got grandfathered in. More recently, however, if we want to get real fun, more recently in Israel, there has been an argument among different factions of ultra-Orthodox Jews about who has the real chicken, right? Because the chicken, too, is a bit of an issue. The chicken did not exist within the ancient Middle East, nor the classical Middle East. It is a South Pacific island bird that has been hybridized or bred rather to be the modern chicken that we know and find so delicious. And there are some people now in Israel arguing over what the real chicken is that has the pedigree of being acknowledged and accepted by the sages, and all other chickens are not legitimate. They are not kosher because they are not traceable back through the line of the original chicken that has this acceptable tradition. Now, I should point out, you don't need to worry about this. The people who are arguing over this are arguing it over because they control the supply of the chickens they think are the real chickens. So they are trying to literally corner the market, create a monopoly where they will be able to sell all of the real chickens to the people in Israel that will keep kosher. Now, this is an argument. It's died down recently, thankfully. But yes, there was this big, in my opinion, scam that was attempted to try and convince people to stop eating the chickens that we've been eating and buy their real chickens, their ancient chickens, as being the only legitimate ones. Don't fall for it. Chickens are chickens. They're fine. There are lots of different species of chickens and many different types, and they are all okay.
But don't they get worried that they'll get a bad name if they're ultra-Orthodox and they get labeled scammers?
Well, because they don't call it a scam, do they? They instead say they're not trying to scam anyone. They're just trying to be more strict. They're just trying to be more legitimate. They have discovered that we were eating the wrong chicken. They argue it on the surface, at least, in good faith. What's really in their heart? Okay, fine. Maybe we don't actually know. But it did seem a little bit ironic that the people who were arguing about this had already created a set of farms to produce the chickens that they were trying to advocate for. That does make it look a little suspicious. But yes, but at the end of the day, if it turns out to have been unsuccessful, they can sell their chickens, wash their hands of it, and I'm sure that they can move on to the next opportunity. All right, speaking of moving on, unless there are any other questions about the chicken or about birds. 3.7. So as everybody is always surprised to learn, there are kosher bugs. Not a lot of bugs, but there are kosher bugs. In particular, locusts are a type of kosher bug, if they are the right type of locust. So for locusts, all that have 4 legs, 4 wings, leaping legs, and wings covering the greater part of the body are clean. Now, Rabbi Yossi adds as well that it has to actually be part of the animals that people call locusts too, that it actually has to have that, that name, so that even if it has 4 legs, 4 wings, and the leaping legs and wings cover the greater part of the body, if people don't call it a locust, it's not considered to be a kosher locust. Now, again, most of the people in the Ashkenazic world are reluctant to eat the locusts that match these criteria because they feel that there is not a clear line of tradition for eating these. In the Sephardic and Mizrahi, and especially in the Yemeni world, the Jews of Yemen, they are more certain over what type of locusts are kosher. And you can find places to buy kosher locusts in Israel if you are visiting. I have not had them yet, I have to admit. I'm still a little uncomfortable about the idea of eating a bug, but they are perfectly kosher. And my own personal discomfort aside, if you are interested, by all means, try a kosher locust if you get the chance. All right. Now, one reason why this would be important in the modern world is many people are looking into alternatives to beef or lamb for protein because of the environmental damage that heavy cattle and lamb production can create. Moving to bugs for protein could be environmentally very important. And many people are experimenting with different types of bugs that can be grown even inside urban skyscraper farms like factories. Now, if they chose to use locusts that were of the kosher variety, that might be a very easy kosher solution for protein for many, many people.
Actually, in Mexico, they eat locusts in Mexico.
Right. But to do it on a mass scale, to create huge factories that are producing these bugs for consumption, would be much easier for kashrut than lamb or beef, because beef and lamb require very special training for the slaughter and very special training for butchery to prepare the meat, as we have already discussed at least a little bit so far. Whereas for bugs, there's no special requirement. You can slaughter a bug by smacking it between your hands and eat it, and it's kosher. You don't need to worry about removing the blood. You don't need to worry about removing any fat. You don't have to worry about any of the aspects that go into producing a kosher lamb, beef, or chicken. And, that would mean you could create factories with very low costs for kosher supervision that could mass produce protein with much less environmental cost and much less financial cost. So it's a very interesting question for the modern world about whether or not we should be getting on the bug bandwagon and seeing if we can't get more kosher varieties of locusts into these experimental ideas.
Yes, however, Rabbi, if they escape, there's an accident in the factory, you destroy all the environment in the area because they will eat everything, all the food, all the trees. So it's very risky. Yes,
if you let out 100,000 locusts by mistake,
an accident happened in the factory.
Yes, you have problems. Now, if you let out 100,000 locusts by mistake, which granted you should have a lot of safeguards to keep that from happening. The building should be built to keep bugs out as well as in. Is that really more damaging to the environment than having 100,000 cows? And doing what cows do for the environment and especially for climate change. It's easier to see how a locust is bad because it eats trees. It's harder to see that a cow is bad because much of its damage is invisible. But it is an interesting calculation to make. And now we move to another interesting topic of not exactly deduction, not exactly induction. And that is fish. Of fish, all that have fins and scales are clean. And Rabbi Yehuda says they must be at least 2 scales and 1 fin, right? The Torah actually makes this quite clear. He's really pointing out that even though the word scale is in the singular in the Torah, that we must understand it as being a multiple of scales. And what are the scales that we're talking about? The scales are those which are immovable, and the fins are those by which it swims. So the scales are the part of the body, right? The actual torso of the body, and they don't flap around, right? So the skin, the fins don't count as scales, only the part that's covering its actual main body. And the fins, of course, are the part that pushes it through the water. Now, there's a couple interesting things about this that are not being mentioned in the Mishnah, but we're here, so I got to talk about them. So one of them is that anything that has scales will have fins, but not everything with fins has scales. So the fin is actually a little bit of a leftover. It's a bit of an unnecessary addition. It's there to help us have a fuller sign, and it's there also to teach us, says the Midrash, that everything with scales will have fins, as a way of giving us an insight into the greatness with which God gave the Torah, so that we would learn that these two always go together, that if you have scales, you have fins, and that we would then be amazed as we examine our world to discover that connection. Now, some things you may not think of that are not kosher are like catfish. Catfish is not kosher because it doesn't have scales. The skin of a catfish is not like the skin of other fishes. It doesn't have those little bits of scale that can come off. And of course, things like lobsters and oysters and dolphin and whale, hopefully very obviously, are not kosher, and you can see because they don't have proper scales at all. Quick question, Aaron?
Yes, Rabbi. Is fins in the singular? Because it's plural as it's written here, but it says you only need one.
Right. So fins are plural in the Torah, and scale is singular. And Rabbi Yehuda is saying that, in fact, you need multiple scales, but you'd only need technically one fin. Now, again, that's not a problem because we know anything with scales actually has the fins, but he's simply trying to help clarify the Torah's language. Now, in the modern world, what is the most hotly interesting argument over fish? What fish is there that people are still making fights about whether it's kosher or not?
Swordfish.
Swordfish.
A delicious swordfish with mashed potato.
Swordfish is delicious with anything. but swordfish is a controversial topic, but it shouldn't be. Again, like the turkey, there is a history of discovery for the swordfish that makes it hard to understand. And the rabbis in the Talmud, as codified as well in the law books, explain that as long as an animal has scales at some point in its life, it is considered to be kosher. If it starts with scales but then loses them, or if it starts without scales and then gains them, it's perfectly fine. And I should point out that this is 100% obvious when you think about it, because every fish starts without scales. Every fish starts as a tiny little egg that hatches into a tiny little, like tadpole almost, that does not look anything like a fish. But eventually it will grow up to be a fish. So if it had to have scales for its whole life, then no fish would be kosher. Just because all fish start off in that very, very tiny little way. Now, swordfish, when you pull them up out of the water nowadays, like when they're full grown, they don't have scales. That's why people love hanging them up on the wall, because they have beautiful skin that is all smooth and shiny and colorful, and it makes a beautiful decoration. And so the earliest people who discovered this for Judaism said, well, it's got no scales, so it can't be kosher. However, as marine biologists and zoologists continued to study and discovered the life cycle of the swordfish, they discovered it actually starts off with scales when it is in the younger form. And those scales disappear as it gets older. Aha, says Judaism, therefore it should be kosher at any point in its life cycle. But by this point, the custom had already become to not eat swordfish. And so that means that most Orthodox kosher supervisors will not give their permission to swordfish as being kosher. Even though technically it meets all of the criteria for being a kosher fish, because there was already the inertia of not eating swordfish, most kosher supervisors from the Orthodox world will not overturn that tradition, that pattern. The conservative movement, on the other hand, said, what are you talking about? This is a clear, cut and dry case. This is very, very obvious. This fits exactly what the rabbis of the Talmud and the other law books were talking about. It's kosher. We made a mistake when we said it wasn't kosher in the previous decades. Now that we have more information, we can see it is kosher. And so the conservative movement says, swordfish is absolutely 100% kosher. Please enjoy it with mashed potatoes or anything else. But it is a very interesting examination of how halakha, of how Jewish law works in the Orthodox and conservative movements. And we are willing to admit that new information will sometimes force us to update modern applications of the law, because new information is always a welcome addition to how we are trying to see how the halakha, the Torah, fits into God's world. Because God made the Torah and God made the world, they have to fit together somehow. And if we get new information, we update our understanding to make sure that we now know better how it works. Aaron, I see your hand up.
Yeah, briefly. Hey, Rabbi, just out of curiosity, where did they get rid of the argument that says for the people who argued that it had to have scales at the time it's eaten or slaughtered?
No one got rid of the argument. They basically said, since it was decided it wasn't kosher, we are going to continue to treat it as non-kosher.
But there was never an argument that said it had to have scales at the time it's being slaughtered?
Nowhere in the discussion of the Talmud does anyone that I remember take that position. No one actually argues for that position. They merely argue against it, which is to say that at any point in the life cycle, as long as there are as long as there are two scales on its body, then it's okay.
Oh, so the Talmud does argue against that position then?
Yes. No, it's made very explicit in the Talmud and very clear in the law codes. So please, if you like swordfish, enjoy it. All right, and now we're going to begin in chapter 4, another topic which is probably going to make people uncomfortable. And not just uncomfortable because the people are going to be inevitably wanting to draw comparisons to the modern debate with regards to abortion, but because it is a little icky. We are going to talk about what happens to the fetus inside of a cow if the mother is being slaughtered. Right, so this is a mother cow that has a baby cow inside of it, and the mother cow is being slaughtered. So let's see what we can do. So this is chapter 4, Mishnah 1. If an animal was having difficulty giving birth, and the fetus put forth a limb and then put it back in, it may be eaten when its mother is slaughtered. If it put forth its head, even though it put it back in, it is considered as born. All right, so let's get this straight. First, generic situation. I don't know how generic this is in a farm, but boring situation. You have a pregnant cow. You take the pregnant cow, you slaughter the cow. After you slaughter the cow, you open it up and you remove a living baby cow from inside of it. Technically speaking, please don't get squeamish or mad. Technically speaking, that baby cow is already dead. Even though it's walking around, even though it's going moo moo, because it was part of the mother when the mother was slaughtered, its status is the same as its shoulder, the mother cow's shoulder. It is meat. The fact that it's moving around, the fact that it's blinking and walking and doing cow stuff doesn't mean you have to slaughter it a second time. It's already dead. It just doesn't know it yet. Which means that if you slaughter it improperly, club it, shoot it, strangle it, whatever, it's still already kosher. The same way that if you have prepared a shoulder properly, and then you drop it in the dirt and pick it up and wash it off, it's still kosher. You probably don't want to eat it. I personally would not want to eat this cow, but it is still technically kosher. Because it was part of the mother when the mother was slaughtered, nothing else needs to be done to slaughter the baby cow that was inside of it. You still have to prepare the meat and do all the other things that are necessary, but as far as the slaughter goes, there is nothing else that needs to be done. Yes, Natan.
But if you say that if the baby is inside the mom when the mom was slaughtered, and
Yes.
it's already considered the baby dead.
Right.
It's not treifa.
No. I know. It's weird, right? It feels weird.
Yeah.
But the rabbis considered the unborn cow to be the same as the mother's shoulder, lungs, heart, liver, any other part of the cow. And so when you slaughter the mother, the liver becomes available to eat. You don't have to do anything extra to slaughter the liver. You don't have to do anything extra to slaughter the leg. It's dead, and therefore it's been slaughtered, therefore the whole part becomes kosher. The baby cow was part of the mother at the time of the slaughter. Therefore, the baby cow is already slaughtered, even though it's not dead. And you're right, this is very counterintuitive, unless you really focus on the idea that the unborn is no different than any other part of the mother animal. You once you get that idea firmly embedded, then it does make sense, right? When I slaughter one animal, I don't have to do anything else to slaughter the other parts of the animal. I have to prepare it, like we've talked about, but the slaughtering you only do once per animal. If the baby animal was really just part of the bigger animal because it hadn't come out yet, then what else would I need to do? It's still part of it. It may feel weird because it's walking around and looks like it's separate, but it wasn't separate when the slaughtering happened. And therefore, I don't have to do anything extra for it. Now, that brings us to the difficulty of our Mishnah, which is, okay, regular baby cow found inside the mother, I understand. What if it puts out a leg while it's being born, then pulls it back in, and then you slaughter the mother before the baby comes out, right? Does that count as having been born because its leg came out? It's still inside when the mother is slaughtered, but it was partly outside before it got slaughtered. So what does it count as? And the rule the Mishnah is telling us is that if it put out a leg, then when the leg goes back in, it can still be slaughtered. I should point out that there's an argument in the Talmud that eventually settles that you're not allowed to eat that leg, that the leg is considered born, but the rest of it isn't. But the rest of it is still considered to be perfectly fine. You just cut off the leg that got stuck out, and then you do whatever you want with the rest of the baby cow. However, if its head comes out, even if the head then goes back in before you kill the mother, that baby cow is considered to have been born. And that means after you've killed the mother and you get the baby cow out from inside of it, you still would have to slaughter the baby cow if you wanted to eat it, because it's considered
breathe and have a sign of life.
Right. Once that head is out, then it has the ruach, it has the breath. And that is, as we know back from Genesis 2, right? That is how God made all things. God breathed life into them. So once the head is out, boom, it is now considered born, even if it went back in before the mother was finished being slaughtered. Yes, Aaron.
Hey, Rabbi, if you do slita on the cow that sticks its leg out, then you can still eat the leg as long as you do slita, right?
If you do shchita, slaughter, on the cow after its leg is out, can you eat the leg as well? You know, that's a great question. One that I don't remember having come up or covered. My intuition tells me that yes, if you do shchita, then you would permit the entirety of the animal. There's nothing wrong with doing shchita on that cow. And indeed, I would recommend that if you are going to slaughter that cow that was born inside the mother, that you should do shchita as the best way to kill it. But yes, I believe that would mean that the rest of it would become accessible. Again, it's not a topic that I've come across before, and one that I am working off my logic from what we've got here. So if you find a counter fact, I'd love to hear about it. But yes, that does make sense. All right. And as Rabbi Kulp does try to make explicit, this is a text, and this idea, as it's further elaborated on by the Talmud and by law codes, that is relevant to the arguments about abortion among humans. That indeed, by and large, the fetus that is inside of a mother is considered to be an ever, a limb of the mother, a portion of the mother. And thus, under the appropriate circumstances, if it needs to be removed, then it is permissible to remove it up until the time when the head has emerged. Once the head has emerged, then no. Now it is considered to be a separate life, and we cannot endanger it any more than we could endanger the mother on its behalf. And that can create tragedy, of course. But it is possible to terminate a pregnancy, to have an abortion under different circumstances where it is necessary to remove this unborn, this limb, this fetus under these circumstances. But I don't want to go down the whole long discussion about what those circumstances are, because it is complicated and involves a whole nother class that I'm trying to put together. Because I think that the discussion of abortion has reemerged on the American political scene. And I think that it would be important for people to know the different texts in Judaism that speak on that topic. And let's go ahead and, we'll do the next Mishnah as well. I think we can, this is not the next Mishnah, this is the rest of that Mishnah. Yeah, I always get confused with the way Rabbi Kulp divided up the Mishnahs like in the paragraphs. So yes, let's finish off Mishnah 1. Whatever is cut off from the fetus within the womb and left inside may be eaten, but whatever is cut off from the spleen or kidneys of the animal and left inside may not be eaten. This is the rule. That which is from the body of the animal is forbidden, but that which is not from the body of the animal is permitted. All right, so why is this an issue? Well, the issue here is cutting off a piece of an animal while it's still alive. In general, there is a very clear prohibition on removing part of an animal and eating it while it is still alive, right? So if you have a cow and you cut off its ear and you cook that ear, you are breaking the mitzvah, right? You are absolutely doing something that is prohibited. Even though the cow is still alive, you are not allowed to remove part of an animal to eat it while it's still alive. You're allowed to remove it for other reasons, but that's complicated. But as far as removing it to eat, you got a problem. So here, where the fetus is inside the animal, what happens if I reach into the mother and I cut up the baby cow inside, and then I slaughter the mother? Can I eat the parts of the baby cow inside that I cut up? Or does that count as having been cut from the living animal, meaning the mother? And the rule is you can eat the parts of the baby cow that were cut inside the mother, but you cannot eat any part of the mother that was cut inside and then she was slaughtered. Right? You can eat from the body of the fetus, but you cannot eat from the body of the animal. You can eat from the body of the fetus, but you cannot eat from the body of the mother. That the fetus is considered separate enough that its butchering inside the mother, which again, I don't know exactly how practical that is, but a farmer might be able to tell me. The butchering inside the mother is not considered to be removing a limb from a living creature, because the fetus is not considered alive yet because it has not left the womb. And it's not considered part of the mother in that cutting it is considered to be cutting her. Cutting her liver, cutting her spleen, cutting her kidneys inside before you do shechita, before you do the slaughter, that would be a problem. All right, that's probably more graphic than people were expecting to get tonight. Aaron, you have a question?
Yes, Rabbi. That seems kind of counterintuitive to everything we just learned, because it said, well, one, it said the fetus was part of the mother, and now it's saying it's a little bit separate. I get that point. But
Right.
even if you consider the fetus separate from the mother, you still did not perform slita. So it's kind of
Right.
weird that
yes, it is kind of weird. You are absolutely right. Right. This is indeed counterintuitive. The most interesting laws are the counterintuitive one, because those are the ones that force us to scratch our head and say, you know what? If God hadn't given us this from Torah, if this was not the logical deduction from all of the mitzvot, I would not have figured this out on my own. Right? Without the Torah, the written Torah, and without the oral Torah, I would not have known this. And I would be left wondering what to do in this situation. But thankfully, we have the written Torah, we have the oral Torah, we have the Mishnah and the Talmud and the halakhic midrash to help us navigate this. And to understand that, as counterintuitive as it may feel, that this is the final analysis of the law. Now, you can go into the midrash halakha to look up more of the citations from the Torah for why. You can go into the Talmud to find more of the implications and debate. That is always the difficult part about doing Mishnah, is you're in the middle ground. You're neither looking at the original text explicitly in most cases, nor are you looking at the follow-up analysis in most cases. Maybe someday we'll either look at some Talmud or we'll look at some halakhic midrash, and then we'll be able to fill in the gaps. But thankfully, the Mishnah does give us a chance, being in the middle, to get a little bit of both, and to do it in a way where we can cover a lot more material than either of the other methods of study.
But Rabbi, is there any non-statutory reason on why they created this exception?
Well, again, the rabbis did not consider themselves to be creating an exception. They considered themselves to be following the logical deduction from the commandments and the tradition as they received it.
Sorry, is there any non-statutory reason as to why this exception is in the Torah?
Okay. That's a different question. Sorry. So I have not seen any explanation of what was the Torah thinking to make this the ultimate rule, to make it turn out this way. We could begin to speculate, but I haven't actually seen any speculation other than the basic principle that the rabbis wanted to make sure that what was inside the animal was considered to be part of the animal, but what was growing within the animal was not considered to be an actual limb if it was being removed from the animal. Now, if I wanted to get very outside the box and outside of the tradition and look into the practical life of being a farmer or a shepherd or a cowboy, this is very, very practical, because you might have a cow that is having a difficult birth. And when the cow is having a difficult birth, you may need to abort the baby cow inside of it. And knowing that you can kill the baby cow inside of it without causing yourself to break the mitzvah of removing a living limb from the mother cow would be critical, because otherwise you would lose not only the baby cow, but you'd be losing the mother as well. So knowing that you have that permission without it being considered of tearing the limb from a living animal would be very important as a practical consideration. The Torah doesn't always go out of its way to make life practically and financially convenient for us, but it does often make certain considerations that do work out that way sometimes. So that might be a possible reason why the Torah is giving us a break on this particular ruling.
But Rabbi, is there a reason why you can, even if it's not part of the mother, and you can still remove it? Is there any reason that you're able to eat it without it having it slitubin performed on it?
I can't come up with one off the top of my head. My guess is that, again, that it was probably a way of salvaging something of the loss of what had just happened with the difficult birth. And also because it would be physically impossible to do shechita inside of another animal.
Right.
So it's inevitable. But you're right. The alternative would be that it would have to be discarded. But if it had to be discarded, then we would have to say that it was indeed part of the mother, and we had broken the mitzvah of having removed it. So it's kind of a catch-22, and this seems to be the best solution.
Yeah. The only thing I could possibly think of when I saw this is that the purpose of shlita is to perform a non-painful way to kill the mother. And since that's impossible in a situation like you said, it doesn't have to be performed.
Right. There is no possible way of doing shlita inside the womb.
All right.
All right. Good questions. Good discussion. And I've got to go have dinner now. Luckily, I'm not having meat, so that'll make things a little bit easier tonight. Take care, everyone, and be well.